Just to start us off, we thought that Rachel and I would just tell you who we are, what our PhD backgrounds are, how we came to be here, what our journey was, just quickly, who we're funded by, what institution. So I'll go first. So I am doing a history PhD at the University of Leicester, but the funding that I've got with the IHRC, Midlands Four Cities, is such that you can share supervisors from other institutions. So I'm also at the University of Birmingham. And it's an open doctoral award. So I constructed my own research proposal and project, and I'm sort of just rolling with that. I'm with Professor Claire Anderson and Dr. Kate Smith, who's at Birmingham. I went straight from my master's at the University of Birmingham in modern British studies straight to the PhD, and I'm in my second year. So my PhD was a continuation from undergraduate and master's level dissertations. I was going to go for a collaborative doctoral award it was a museum-based project, but it just was not right for me. I can't see myself have sustained it for 4 years. So I went with my own project. And it's about family life in colonial South Asia in the long 19th century. So using personal letters to understand how people lived and communicated and dealt with long distance. So I'm also doing lots of other things. So it's not just the PhD that I'm engaged with. I'm also the co-convener of History Lab, which I started this term with Rachel, and I've run my own project with another PhD student who is doing a collaborative doctoral award, and we've recently launched the virtual seminar series Culture, Things and Empire. So there's a lot going on with me other than the PhD, which is the general, you'll get to learn about that. But Rachel, do you want to introduce your amazing project?
Thank you, Ellen. I'm Rachel Smith. I'm a third year PhD student in history based at Bath Spa University. I too have funding from the AHRC, but mine is part of the South Western Wales Doctoral Training Partnership. So me and Ellen come from two different funding bodies. Just a note on all the sort of technical terms, me and Ellen are using things like collaborative doctoral partnership and things like that. We will be going through those terms later in the presentation. It's just so we don't bore you right now with them all. And I got this funding not quite straight after my MA. I took a year out to work. So I worked as representation and advice coordinator at Bath Spa Students' Union. So I've been at Bath Spa for my BA, MA and PhD. But before I got funding, I was self-funding my MA through part-time work. So I had 3 jobs during my MA, and I did mine part-time rather than the traditional full-time route in order to basically fund it and my life. I wouldn't have been able to afford to do it full-time. So some of you may be considering doing your PhD in that way. And we do have some panelists that are self-funded as well as people that have funding. So we are going to be looking at both in the presentation, and also you've got more opportunities to ask questions in the roundtable later on that. My PhD topic is looking at expressions of anxiety in 18th, 19th familial correspondence of a particular family network, the Canning family. I looked at a very small proportion of their letters for my MA dissertation, and then I've continued with looking at 14 members of the network for my PhD. I'm looking at this through the life cycle, starting from marriage, courtship and marriage, and going all the way through to death. So to try and get an idea of how anxieties change at different points in the life cycle, and also looking at how they change from the mid-18th to the sort of coming up to the mid-19th century. So if you have any interest in any of those areas, I'm your gal. Yeah, so we both had slightly different routes, me and Ellen, although we both look at letters, so we do also have things in common. And what you'll find throughout this process, both today and also PhD journeys, is that you'll have a lot of differences. This is mine. This is my PhD journey. You'll find that you have a lot of differences, but you'll also find so much in common, either through your projects, through your backgrounds, through your universities, or through your supervisors. So there'll be lots and lots of ways to connect with people, even if at first you don't think you'll be able to. It's amazing how I've managed to connect to PhDs doing all sorts of projects throughout history, philosophy, English, sociology. It's incredible the differences and similarities that your projects can have, and you can have very meaningful conversations with a lot of PhD students. So hopefully you'll get a chance to ask some of these questions that might be on your mind, or just that you might want to get to know some of us in the roundtable later on.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. That's my PhD journey as well, sort of a scribble of stages. So we thought that we'd start off by asking, why do you want to do a history PhD or just a PhD? So if we could ask that you take a few moments just to write in the chat your reasons for wanting to pursue a PhD course, and then we'll try and collate these and reflect on the key factors that are motivating the group to go for their doctorate. So it could be that you want to continue in academia in research or teaching. It could be that you're passionate about the subject or writing about the subject. It might be that you want to work in institutions like museums and galleries, or that you simply want to be a doctor. And it's really important to have these at the front of your mind so that you can remind yourself during those stressful periods why you're doing this in the first place. And just while you're doing that, I've just put up some social media accounts that you might want to look into following. They certainly helped me through it, just some inspirational quotes now and then, because it is quite a daunting experience, and to know that other people are going through the same thing and what helps them cope is really useful to know. So Rachel, I can't seem, oh, I can see the chat, all good.
So I put an eye on it.
all technical. Okay.
A lot of people at the moment are saying that they want to stay in academia and continue research.
Yeah.
Some are wanting to be teachers as well. Some people are also looking into museums, galleries, and the heritage sector, which is great.
So some people want to continue their MA research, which is great. Seems that you're enthusiastic about that. Fabulous.
Some people are coming back from a break from undergrad to MA level, and now want to continue going, which is great.
Yeah.
I love the fact that one of the passion projects for someone was too big for an undergrad or an MA thesis. So the PhD is going to be the one for them. That would be brilliant.
Go for it. Okay, coming back to a passion of history, which is exactly the kind of energy that you need to do it. So brilliant.
Very good. I want to be a specialist in my field. I think that's really, really good as a motivation for doing a PhD as well, that you really have that ambition to be the one to come to about your topic, which you all will be when you've done your PhDs.
Absolutely.
Yes, don't worry. We're going to be talking a lot about how to get in touch with supervisors and things like that. And I like that someone's really wanting to inspire women, and particularly working class women. So really wanting to be a beacon for people who maybe traditionally see themselves as not suitable for doing a PhD.
Yeah.
Broadening out CVs, working in heritage. Brilliant. Yeah, there's a really nice range of reasons, wouldn't you say, Ellen?
Yeah, definitely. Really nice to see that, they're bringing in that sort of passion for history, which is where it all starts from that, essentially. That's the main ingredient. Okay, so should we move on, Rachel? Yeah, okay. So who is...
This is where we get technically really like, oh my goodness, on poor Ellen's part. She's controlling the screen and I'm talking. So
do you want to just tell me?
Yeah, so the first, this is the process. So this is the flow chart of what we're going to be discussing today in stages. And I just wanted to break it down for you so that you could really understand the sort of different processes and roughly the order you'll start thinking about them. So we've already covered that you're deciding you want to do a PhD, and we've already looked at the reasons why you'd like to do that. The next stage, which Ellen will be talking about in just a second, is your project idea. So what is it that you want to do? And this will come in two forms. You'll either think of your own project, or as Ellen's already said, you may apply for a collaborative doctoral partnership, which is a project that already exists and has already been formulated by a body. And then you will be applying for that project rather than constructing your own. Once you've found a project idea, then you'll be finding a supervisor or supervisors. You'll normally have two. Sometimes they're from the same institution. If you're funded, you're more than likely to have two across two different institutions. And you'll also be looking at which institutions you want to study at. And we'll talk a bit more about the balance between finding supervisors and finding an institution later in the talk. Next, once you've found your supervisors and you've thought about which institution you'll go to, you'll contact those supervisors and then they'll help you narrow down your topic. This will lead to three things: filling in the application, writing the project proposal, and references. I couldn't get them all to come up in one go, unfortunately. My tech skills that was too far gone. So you'll be filling in the application after you've started narrowing down that topic. That'll be writing the project proposal, filling in any personal statements, and that will also mean getting references. So you'll need to think about contacting your academic references at this sort of early stage of the process, because it can take them a while to find the time, particularly at this time of the year, and also at the moment with everything else going on, to prioritize your reference. So make sure that you think about that really early on. The next thing you might want to think about is how you're going to fund your PhD. So you might apply for funding from various funding bodies, and we will be talking about those later in the presentation. You might opt for a loan. This could be a bank loan, a postgraduate bank loan, or it could be funding. So there is now student funding for postgraduate loans. Or of course, you could be self-funding either through part-time work or from savings. So there are a couple of ways of accessing this. Once you've put in your application and you've thought about your funding, and if you're applying for funding, you'll be putting in an application for that separately. We'll talk about that a bit later as well. You'll be asked to interview for funding and or the PhD itself. And there'll be two outcomes for this. One will be accepted, rejected for the funding, and two will be accepted and rejected for your PhD place. Just because you're rejected for funding does not mean you'll be rejected for your PhD place. There are two very separate processes for funding and PhDs, and just because you don't get funding does not mean that your PhD topic is invalid. And that's really, really important to remember. They're not mutually exclusive. You will not be automatically rejected on both accounts. There is a likelihood, though, if you are accepted for funding, you will then likely get your PhD place accepted, but more often than not, even if you're rejected for funding, you still get your place. And I want to highlight that here.
Great. So just to start with the project idea, the first step in the PhD journey is to decide that you want to do it and then have a project idea in place. So if you're going for funding applications, you need to get your application in generally around January time. So you probably already have an idea of the project. So ask yourself, will the project build upon your undergraduate or master's research? And if so, be sure that it's not just an extension of this research. Make sure that it actively builds upon this to create new work. And it's worth revisiting your idea to be sure that it is 3 things: feasible, original, and to the point. So make sure you're getting your point across. And this, really going through this a few times, will be helpful when it comes to interviews. So just to cover feasibility, especially in terms of the pandemic and limited travel and an uncertain future, check with your supervisor to see if any of your ideas need adapting. I'm certainly doing this even now, so it's not anything particularly strange. So also, are the resources which you need in order to complete the PhD accessible? Is the project too big or wide in scope? Will you need to narrow it down? Or perhaps you've chosen a case study that's too small and need to broaden it out, in which case you'll need to think of whether your idea has the capacity to cover approximately 6 chapters, each of 10,000 words each, which seems a lot now, even seems a lot to me in my second year, but it's doable, and you will cover that if it's feasible. So you also need to ensure that checkbox of originality is ticked. So examiners are going to be asking you how your project makes a contribution to knowledge, and they'll say that a lot. It doesn't have to be radical or groundbreaking. You're probably not creating like a new theory or anything. It just needs to demonstrate originality in some way. So that can be relatively small. But completing a thorough literature review for your research proposal will help you understand and articulate where your contribution lies, how you're going to be not just filling in that gap, that's a bit of a contentious term, but creating new work that really helps establish the field a bit more. So the third point is angle and argument and point. So what is the key point of your project? What's it trying to achieve? And why would the arguments, claims, and points that you're making be beneficial to the current state of the field? So what's it really bringing? If you cover all those 3, then you've got a winning sort of project idea. So next. And most importantly, does the project idea excite you? Does it interest you? This enthusiasm needs to sustain you for up to 4 years for full-time students and 7 years part-time. So those reasons that we discussed at the start should be at the front of your mind when writing applications, because examiners are going to want to know what's motivating you. It's this that will help you understand the wider significance of your project, which is always important. So you need to demonstrate impact and significance. Okay, next is Rachel.
So I'm going to talk briefly now about supervisors and institutions. So the first thing you might be thinking is, how do I find a supervisor? Like, I've no idea. Some of you may already have some ideas. For example, you may end up working with the same ones from your MA. But if you have literally no idea on how to find a supervisor, the best thing to do would be to go on institutions' websites, onto their staff pages, particularly for the department that you're interested in. It might not necessarily be history, so bear that in mind, particularly if your project's more interdisciplinary or it's quite closely aligned to other areas. For example, mine looks at the history of emotions. It also looks at letter writing, and my second supervisor is in the English department at Cardiff because of the idea of analysing language and text, in this case in 18th and 19th century letters, which she specialised in. So the idea here is to think about what your topic is and where you might be able to find that specialism. Look out in case there are any certain research centres at institutions that might be in the field that you're looking at. This means that they're more likely to have a supervisor in your field that is at the top of their field at the moment and doing research in a similar area. In order to find supervisors, sometimes you can go onto funding body websites and they sometimes have a find the supervisor search function. If you are looking at doing funding, that can sometimes be helpful. Bear in mind, some I know are very, very out of date. So I would recommend going straight to institution staff department pages. And I think you'll find much more information there that will help you with your search. If there are any particular areas of the country you're thinking about, it might be that you're geographically bound by a certain area for whatever reason, then start your search local rather than further away, thinking more about the feasibility of your project and your ability to do the project as well. It's not just about whether the project itself is feasible, it's whether you can do it as well. So how do you approach a supervisor? Well, I mean, it might be something to ask the panel perhaps later on to get more variety of experiences. But I simply emailed my tutor at Cardiff. I'd never met her before. And what I emailed with was, hi, I'm Rachel. I'm hoping to apply for funding for this and looking at this project. And then I gave a brief scope of the project outline. So this is why we recommend in our timeline that you actually have a project idea before you contact a supervisor, so that you can actually go in there and show them that you are knowledgeable, you've already thought about this, and that yes, you might need their help in narrowing and fine-tuning the project, but you've already made a good start in understanding where you want this process to go. That will help supervisors, make the decision as to whether you are a candidate that they are able to supervise and that it falls in their specialism, and also it gives them confidence that you're ready to do a PhD. So yeah, and then I just said, would you like to be my supervisor, or in this case, my second supervisor? And then she got back to me and said, yes, send me over your draft proposal, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes people might say no. It might be for a variety of reasons. It might be that they don't feel like they're the best person to supervise you. It might be that they're too busy. And please don't take any of this to heart. It doesn't mean that you won't find somebody else to do that job for you. People are constantly have lots of pressures on them in academia, as I'm sure you're all very aware. And so I wouldn't take any rejections of this to heart. It will be for a reason beyond your control normally. And normally it will be because they don't think that they're the best person to supervise your project. So once you've contacted the supervisor and they've said yes, then hopefully you should be able to then speak to them about narrowing down your project, which we'll get onto in just a moment with Ellen. But there is one question that I want to bring up just before we move on to that, and that is the supervisor versus institution debate. People tend to either choose supervisors and then don't worry about the institution, or some are actually very specific about wanting to go to a specific institution for their project. And then this obviously restricts them to choosing a supervisor within that institution. There is no right and wrong way about going about this. What I would say in this debate is that while the institution is important for a variety of reasons, thinking about things like research culture, opportunity, if you're interested, prestige, although I find that's not necessarily something that tends to come into play too much at this point. But what I would say is the supervisor is the main person you will be working with for the next 3, 4, up to 7 years, depending on full-time or part-time study. And they will be the person who, besides yourself, will know the most about this project. And they're the only person potentially that may care. Everybody else may have a very short attention span to your project, but they will be really interested. They will be someone who really wants to know what's going on. They'll be giving you feedback on drafts. And so it's really important that you pick a supervisor that is not just an expert in their field, but that you also get along with. And a lot of the time, it might be worth setting up a meeting with a potential supervisor to actually get to know them a little bit and actually think, can I work with you for the next 4+ years? Because that relationship is so, so important to a PhD experience, and also the progress of your project as well. You want to know that you are going to be supported through what can be a very difficult journey for many people. And even if it's not difficult, there are ups and downs at all points, and you want that person to be the person you go to that will help make things better. So I would stress that when you're looking for a supervisor, is really feel comfortable knowing that they'll be able to help you both on a professional level and also on a personal level with this process. Because it is such a roller coaster, you will have ups and downs at all points of the journey. Yeah, so while the institution, I would still consider definitely think much more about the supervisor, and then if the institution is important to you, then make that an important secondary factor. I would say also, if you're worried about the research opportunities at institutions, at the moment, a lot more things are online, and there's a lot more workshops and training opportunities and society conferences and things that are working online. So there is now access to globally a lot more opportunities than there has been previously. Well, how long this may continue for is, we can't obviously speak to how long that might be, but it's just worth bearing in mind that things can go beyond an institution, but the supervisor, you can't go in the same way beyond them.
Okay, so you've sorted out an institution, a supervisor, and what's the next step? So the next steps will probably be refining the project idea and speaking to your supervisor constantly about this and constantly revising it. It's a process that's ongoing, so don't feel like it's ever going to be complete. It's still ongoing for PhD students. So usually in year one of the PhD, you're encouraged to read widely and follow tangents, and then begin to narrow down the scope of your project according to themes, sources, key case studies, research questions, and then eventually chapters. But there's a lot of refinement to do before the PhD takes place. So those examining your application will be looking, as we've said, for a project that's feasible and doable within the limits of a PhD. But be mindful of the decisions that you're making. So ask yourself how you are narrowing down the scope of the project and why you're doing it. Because any decisions that you make at this stage and throughout in terms of scope and extent of project will need to be defended in the viva at the end and in mid-year reviews and end-of-year reports. So thinking about this now will help you just understand the trajectory of your project and why you're doing what you're doing. So I thought it would be nice just to take a look at the British Library's online repository of theses. I have trouble saying that word, especially the titles that appear on a generic search. So I typed in my area of research, which is British India, and it comes up with specific research areas. So you can see there's Baptist missions, chaplains in Bengal, the military in the Punjab. So it's really quite narrow. It's not a history of British India. It's really specific geographical, chronological themes and theories that make it specific. So you can also access on some of them, so you can see the little padlock in green at the bottom, you can access these digital versions of a person's thesis, and it can be useful to read the abstract at the start, because you'll probably be asked in your research proposal, which we'll talk about, to provide an abstract, just like at the start of an article. So you can get an idea of how to sell your project. And the key ideas should be laid out here with precision and clarity. So examiners are going to be reading loads of applications, so you need to make it as easy for them as possible, and they'll really thank you for it. So next up is funding with Rachel.
So choosing a funding source. So this might be something that a lot of people might be considering at this moment in time, as the funding source for the UKRI bodies such as AHRC, ESCR, etc. are opening shortly, and these are often in the forms of DTPs. It can be collaborative projects, and so a lot of you might be thinking about funding at this stage. There are quite a few funding options to think about initially. So there's the funding bodies, as I've just mentioned. So sometimes you can get funding directly from UKRI bodies such as AHRC, ESRC, etc. But you can also apply to doctoral training partnerships, or DTPs. So I've put on me and Ellen's SWW DTP, which is the South Western Wales, for AHRC, which is Arts and Humanities. There is SWDTP for the Sciences, Midlands Four Cities, NERC as well, which is North East Research Council. You've also got funding bodies through Leverhulme, Wolfson, Wellcome Trust, and these are all bodies that potentially history projects may be able to get funding from. The reason I mention the sciences is that you may be doing an interdisciplinary project which is history and science, and therefore you might be able to apply through science DTPs as well as the arts and humanities. So I didn't want to just openly assume that you were all going to be going in arts and humanities routes. It may be that yours is more scientific in approach. So you also can have a look into that as well. Leverhulme and Wolfson tend to be more generic AHRC kind of projects. So they tend to be more arts and humanities based. Wellcome Trust tend to be much more medical humanities and that sort of junction between history and science. So if anyone's looking into Wellcome Trust and you're looking in sort of medical humanities-ish field, public history, etc., that might be another route to think about. Of course, you can also have a look at scholarships and bursaries from various historical societies or from your own institutions, or indeed institutions around the country. These might be partial bursaries, so maybe £1,000, £500, etc. Maybe for specific research trips, so you might need to go to a specific archive and a society might be funding a bursary to go and visit that archive. Or it could be that they cover fees, or indeed it could be that they cover fees and give you what's called a stipend, which is a set of money. At the moment, it's just over £15,000 a year to cover your living costs. These tend to be what you get from DTPs. You tend to get your fees covered and then these stipends. If anybody has any specific questions about sort of DTPs, doctoral training partnerships, or funded bodies like AHRC, please get in touch in the round table with some questions. We don't want to waste time here going into all the ins and outs, because that could also take us an entirely different set presentation to do so. But if anyone would like any more information on those, please bring up some questions in the round table on those. Of course, you don't have to get any scholarships or bursaries. If you want, you're more than welcome to go different routes to fund your PhD. So you can get what's called a postgraduate research loan from the Student Loans Company, applied for in a very similar way that you would have applied for your undergrad and potentially a master's loan as well. You can take out a bank loan, and they do postgraduate or might be graduate loans from most banks. You can do part-time work. I mean, if you really want, you can do full-time work. During my MA, I did 32 hours on average a week. So that's not quite full-time work, but it wasn't far off. So you might be doing a part-time PhD alongside full-time work or part-time work. And of course, you may use some savings as well. What I do think is really important is there is sometimes a stigma around, if you don't have funding in academia, that your project isn't worth as much as someone who's funded. That's not true at all. Funding is often based on what people at that particular moment in time think is feasible, think is interesting, and generally just find it piques their interest rather than or their excitement. And it might be also influenced by what's current at the time. So it might be that certain projects are really in touch with what's going on in society at the time, because you have to remember these funding bodies are funded by the government centrally. So this is taxpayers' money that this is actually coming from. And so therefore there is slight leaning perhaps towards more current projects and things that relate much more to current events and current things that people are interested in. So I would say that it might be a variety of reasons why you don't receive funding, but that doesn't mean that your project is any less viable than anybody else's. And I've put on the slogan here that me and Ellen were coming up with the other day. It's not what you've got, it's what you do with what you've got. So whether you've got funding or whether you don't, the most important thing to remember, it's your project is still viable, still brilliant.
Oh, okay.
And does someone want to turn their mic off?
Well, that's all right. She didn't have to.
There we are. Sorry about that. And yeah, so it's not about whether you've got funding or not. It's all about you, your project, and how you get on with your own PhD. So I don't, just because, for example, I have funding doesn't mean that my colleague who doesn't has any less value, particularly as a colleague, as an academic, in any way, shape or form, because it is very, very subjective, the process. So if you get rejected, you're also welcome to try again the year after. So it isn't the end of that, but I equally don't want anyone coming away from here thinking that it is the be all and end all, because it really isn't. Some of the best PhDs are from people who have not got funding. So I don't want anyone coming away thinking that is it.
Great. Oh no, okay. Did you?
Yeah, this is fine. No, it's right if you want to go back to that one. So if you are applying for funding, so this is something that I want to just briefly talk about, rather than go through the whole process in detail. As I say, please ask questions to the panel later on about this. It's more just general differences between the PhD application, which is what we're focusing on in this talk, and the funding application that you might need to be aware of. So the process is slightly different to the main PhD application process. You will have to apply for funding and to the institution that you want to do your PhD at. Things that will be the same are the research proposal, basic information on things like your education history, your work experience history, the feasibility and originality of your project. Both often have an interview, although not always. I know, for example, my DTP is doing less interviews now, but usually there is an interview at least at your institution as well. They usually both ask for a timeline to completion, and both will ask for those academic references, which you'll need to think about at this point. Differences are a funding application will emphasize the fit, so how your project and you align with the UKRI or the AHRC or that specific DTP. So you'll need to do your research on the funding body that you're applying to, because that will be something they'll really be looking for. What will you bring to them? How will you use the resources that they can give you? Why them and not another funding body, etc. You'll also need to do a personal statement. This tends to look at some of the following: placement ideas, training needs, the dual supervisionary relationship across two institutions. So this tends to be something that people at funded institutions tend to get. They almost require it really as part of that process. And also they'll give you a time limit. So for a full-time funded PhD, you only get 4 years, whereas if you're self-funded, you can go on indefinitely to an extent. You're not restricted in the same way. So you'll need to look up all of these kinds of things before you look at applying for funding. And also bear in mind that the funding process will take a lot longer than if you're just applying for your PhD. So please factor in more time if you're thinking about going down this route.
Great, okay. Yeah, and just a disclaimer, we're really speaking on our experiences. So each DTP will probably have their own way of doing things, but generally it's those key ideas. Same with the research proposal, which I'm going to talk about now. So do your research about writing a research proposal, ask for templates from your institution, ask for word counts, ask supervisors how many drafts they would like to see, and seek feedback early. Some funding bodies provide application writing workshops. So I was speaking at one the other week, really helpful. You get to meet, sometimes you can meet site directors and other leads who can offer an inside glimpse into the process, and ask someone who is not in your field or an expert to read through the proposal, because your examiners are generally not specialists in your area of study. Okay. Great. So the first 3 points of the research proposal is thesis title, thesis statement or summary, and research questions or objectives. So it might not include all of this, but it certainly includes some of these elements. So you want to create a catchy title that draws the eye, that's not too long or not too short. It should state the key aspects of your project. Use keywords and look at book titles for inspiration. I know I had to change mine at the start, and I'm still continuing to change things around to include other elements and different time periods. So don't worry too much, it's a process, but you will need to make it catchy. So the thesis statement or summary, you may just want, clearly state what the project's about. What are its aims and what are you hoping to get out of it? Outline the parameters of the project, the time period, the geographical reach, the key protagonists in your story, the key narratives you want to tell, the key themes, the key theories, and the terminology that you're using. So the funding application and proposal might be shorter. My research proposal was really long, so it depends what you can put in, but it should have some of these elements. The research questions or objectives. So you may want just one research question or several research questions. You may want one key question and then a few sub-questions. Alternatively, in my funding application, I presented 3 key objectives. So I used doing verbs to track, to understand. So I wrote to track how letters, gifts and drawings and photographs helped British travellers to communicate feelings of longing and affection to absent family. So you can be creative. Great. So the next few elements are the historiography or context, the methodology and impact. So in terms of historiography, you want to provide an overview of the existing scholarship, so a mini literature review, but don't just list the texts. You need to start being critical. You need to think about how your project will respond to, or perhaps even challenge these works. So where does your study fit in with the work that has been done previously, or that's been done right now? So it's nice to have a few really new works that are coming out in the field, so you can show that you're really up to date with debates and theories. So the methodology, what archival sources are you using? What interviews are you going to be conducting? And tell us about them, list them, be specific. Where are they located? Is this significant? So will that need to be adjusted due to the pandemic? Are you going to be using digital sources? Are you going to be asking for funding to access these digital platforms like Adam Matthew Digital, archive.org, all those resources that you could tap into? How are you going to analyse them, and what are you expecting them to reveal at this stage? So this is the how part of the proposal. So we've done the what and we'll get to the why later, but it's the how that's important here. So how are you going to provide evidence to back up those claims? And ask yourself what other key scholars have done in a few sentences, and how will the sources that you're going to look at perhaps extend that research that they've done, or even challenge it, or just enrich it in some way. And then they usually ask something along the lines of impact, significance. It's really important to start bringing your research into wider academic and public understandings of the past. So there's a real drive towards how can your research sort of fit in with contemporary issues and debates that are going on. It needs to be meaningful in some way. So could the questions that you are asking shed light on contemporary debates, news issues? And it might not be that recent, but how can it show significance? How can it be impactful to the public or to the academic field or anything like that? It needs to show significance. And then these are sort of the logistics. So sometimes there's a space for you to reflect on why you're prepared to carry out the PhD and what makes you perfect for the role. So certainly I wasn't shy about this. I sort of stated what I'd achieved so far because I was really proud of it, and they're going to want to read that to a certain extent. So it's not always necessary, but you could state master's modules or equivalent experience like placements or internships that demonstrate your previous ventures into the field or into a particular methodology or historical approach, or but it just be aware that it has to be relevant. So I think me and Rachel were talking about, you can certainly spin it in some way, but it does have to be relevant. So you're also generally asked to provide a timeline for completion or of completion. And I was told to split this into 3 rows or categories, including 1, research or field work. So when are you going to get that done? Usually the first and second years, but generally the second year. The second column is writing, usually in the 3rd year, but it can be ongoing. And then an other column, which is what events, seminars, conferences, and societies are you going to engage with? And then it's good practice to reference throughout with footnotes, just like an essay, and provide a bibliography at the end, which doesn't have to be extensive, but some key works. And you could split this into archival or manuscript materials, published primary sources, and secondary texts, including books, articles, and chapters, just like an essay. And of course, sorry, let me go back. So I've forgotten references. Most people do, it's not good. You need to really plan for references. They're essential, and your you could have the best application in the world, but if your referees don't get in their references, then it probably will be rejected. So it's not strictly part of the research proposal document, but you will probably need to provide contact details of someone, usually 2 people, who can be your referees somewhere in the application process. For me, it was the funding part, and be sure to give the referees update information of your own grades, experience, and a copy of your research proposal, so they can draw from that and be really specific. So you need to provide that, and they'll contact them, but you need to remind them to get it in by the deadline. So please don't leave it to the last minute, particularly up to Christmas, because with the pandemic, it's crazily busy, and people are taking vacations. So, and yeah, so they'll have to provide references by the PhD funding deadline. Remind them, email them, don't pester them, but be mindful of the fact that it might go into their junk folder, and yeah, just be really prepared. And so we'll just end with some general tips from Rachel.
Yeah, with the proposal slides that we've had, sometimes those will be in the research proposal, other times they might be in other places in the application, but almost all of those things will be there somewhere. So, and that's in the PhD application for an institution and funding. So I had to provide references for both funding and for my institution. So please get all of that information down for both the PhD application and if anyone's interested in funding. Just a few general tips to finish. I realise we are slightly running behind, but equally this is why we're here. So we don't want to rush you too much. So these are sort of 5 key tips that we want you to think about here. Is get somebody else, or even better, a few people to read over your application. There are so many applications that I know of that actually got rejected because of grammatical errors and lack of proofreading, which would have just been solved if they just got at least 1 or a few people to read over it. This will help with things like structure, if you've included enough information for a reader to understand, because you have to remember it's somebody in the field, but not necessarily someone in your specific area that will be reading your application. So it would be very, like, when I say field, I mean history. I don't even mean necessarily even the area or even the period that you're talking about. So you need to make sure it's quite accessible. So get a couple of other people to read it. Do your research on your supervisors, as I say, really think about who would be good for you personally as well as for your project. Research institutions, research centres, opportunities that they might be able to provide for you. The PhD atmosphere as well, that's also really important to the PhD community at these places. And of course, if you're interested in funding bodies, do your research on them, as they will be asking about this and how you fit in with them in the application. I think we've probably stressed this about 10 times, but don't leave it all to the last minute. This is probably the most important one, especially the research proposal and those academic references. You'll be more likely to be rejected if you leave it at the last minute. The best ones tend to be those that have gone through several draft stages, have been read over by quite a few people. So please, make sure that you don't leave it all to the last minute. If you don't get into an institution or you don't get funding, you can try again in the next cycle. So if you apply to an institution or a couple, you haven't got in, they normally will give you some feedback upon request, and that can help you improve it to apply for next year. The same with the funding process. Alternatively, if you get into an institution but you don't get funding, you are also in your first year able to apply for funding again. They will fund you if you're less than 50% of the way through, aka if you're in first year. So you have another shot. You can keep applying for funding as many times as you want until you start your PhD, and then you've only got the first year. So you can apply over several years if funding is the only option for you. And also enjoy it. This will translate into your application. You've all shown in your opening statements that you're here because you're passionate about history, you're passionate about academia, or that you want to be here in some way because you really, really love the topic. Show this in your application. Supervisors, universities, funding bodies, they all want to see someone enthusiastic about their project, about really knowledgeable about their field. You've taken the extra time to go through journal articles and recent books that have come out, and show them this knowledge, show them this enthusiasm. I've attended this seminar, I've given a paper at this because I was really interested. Show them that you're actually committed to this, because a PhD at the end of the day isn't just about knowledge, it's also about resilience and perseverance. And so showing them that you are dedicated to this, that you are really ready and able and are the best person to do this project, will give them the confidence that this resilience and perseverance will see you through to the end, because it is a slog. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so having this is really, really important for securing confidence in supervisors, unis, and funding bodies.
So we're now kindly joined by a panel of PhD students who have gone through the PhD application process quite recently and are currently completing some fantastic PhD projects, and are also part of our wonderful History Lab committee. So guys, do you mind if we ask for your name? If we go around and ask for your name, research topic, institution, and anything particular about yourselves. So where are you based geographically? Are you funded or unfunded? International, EU, or home students, and a little reflection on what the application process was like for you and how the PhD is going at the moment with pandemic and everything else that's going on. So that way our attendees can ask you questions directly if they want to. And please do. So we've got Vincent, Saffron, Kerry, and I saw Carmel in the participants, maybe not, and Chloe. So Vincent's first on my screen if you want to go first.
Sure. I'm going to try and remember like all the elements. But my name is Vincent Shabani-Dore. I'm doing my PhD at King's College. I work on urban history and history of race. I'm funded by the London Arts and Humanities Partnership, which is the London branch of the AHRC. So I guess what's specific about me and what the experience I can speak to is, as you can probably tell, I'm not English. I'm actually French. So I kind of went for like the kind of EU application thing through the HRC. So I saw actually somebody ask if funding bodies allow international students. HRC does allow European students, but just know you'll be held to a different standard, which is we realized that most of EU students had been waitlisted. I was. And I think that we're often kind of seen as like a small reserve army, and there's kind of a protectionist, nationalist thing there. PhD is going fine. Most of my work is in Los Angeles. I was actually on a fellowship at the Huntington for the HRC when coronavirus hit and had to go back to France. But, you know, I think all in all, I was pretty lucky. I'd done already a lot, and I'd had a lot of help in going to the United States before that. So I guess I'm an example of also how you do like overseas research even through COVID. But I'll leave it to the upper panelists, I guess, now.
Just on that point on international students, the UKRI has announced that the next funding cycle will have international students. EU students will now be international students, but it does mean that international students from across the globe, aka anyone applying outside of the UK, are able to apply for UKRI funding. This is a new announcement that's come out in the last sort of few months. And also on that note, there will be a percentage specifically for aside for international applications of the total body being funded. So say there might be 60, they might fund 20 or something like that. So there is a proportion being put aside for international students. Just as an update on that.
Thanks.
Saffron, you're next on my screen. If you could go next, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Saffron. I'm at UCL. I'm funded by the same funding body as Vincent, but I'm a home student. And I'm researching racial identities and socialist activism in post-war Britain, broadly speaking. And yeah, PhD is going okay at the moment. I mean, I feel like the last 6 months have been pretty stagnant, but also I think that's pretty much the same for everyone. So that's going fine. And maybe also just to say, I think Rachel made the point during the presentation about funders maybe having a specific like criteria for each funding body or specific themes like per year. Like me and Vincent have the same funding in the same cohort, and we both work on race, so that probably isn't a coincidence.
Yeah, I think that I think they had to have a little reckoning because there weren't that many before us. And I think for me, they were just happy to have somebody who works on race and still a white guy. So that probably put my application forward.
Unfortunately, there are still politics involved in all of these things.
Definitely. Chloe, do you want to go next, if that's okay?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm also at UCL, like Saffron. My research topic is families in Belgium and Britain during the First World War, looking at how they coped with the material, moral, and psychological pressures of war. I am self-funded and I am part-time. I'm in my third year. I'm just going into my third year, which is pretty much equivalent to kind of going into second at this point. And I work part-time. I saw there were some questions in the chat about doing a PhD part-time while working alongside. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that. Yeah, and I did my MA part-time as well. So I've got quite a lot of experience of working and studying part-time under my belt. I think that's it.
Thanks, Chloe. Kerry, next, please.
Yeah, so my name is Kerry. I'm studying at the University of Northampton. I'm self-funded, but I am studying full-time. So I can speak about self-funding and that kind of thing. and that kind of perspective, and I do work kind of alongside it. So if anyone's looking at kind of balancing things, and I might potentially switch to part-time. So if anyone's basically a little bit tentative about their situation and they don't know what they're going to do, then I can, I guess, speak to being flexible, should we say, and figuring out your situation. So yeah. Oh, and sorry, I didn't even say what I study. I study political material culture and like memorabilia produced kind of late 18th, early 19th century in Britain. And I'm a home student, sorry.
That's great, thank you.
I forgot to mention, sorry, I'm an EU student as well, like Vincent, but I'm Belgian, so might be relevant.
Great, yeah, definitely. Okay. Okay, brilliant. So we'll go to questions now. We've had loads, so Rachel's been collating them away. So the first question is from Tracy Wilston. What kind of referees would you recommend? So obviously, potentially a former tutor, and do they need to have had a PhD themselves? Does anyone want to speak to that particularly?
I think one of the most important thing I was told is that they have an institutional affiliation. Even asking people that have been for academia but have left weakens your case a little bit, just because also the referee, it's not just they know your work, it's also you would hope that the people on the panel know the referee, and so that they're involved somehow in academic life still. I think I had one letter of recommendation for an application it's not the one I ended up getting, so maybe that's actually a good, maybe that's a good reason not to. But I think that's the most important thing.
Great. We can whiz through them, or if anyone else, I'll take that as everyone sort of agrees. Yeah, I had two academic people. I actually had my supervisor, which is a good idea because they'll be able to, if they've taught you, they know your work, they're gonna want to promote you because it feeds into their sort of REF and funding sort of credentials. Okay, so next is from Hannah. How many of the funding bodies allow international students? And yeah, should we start with that?
I suppose I might take that just because I just had that update a minute ago. It's just that they aren't international at the moment, is just EU for most funding bodies. But by the next application cycle, which is the one we're currently about to enter, international students, as I say, will be accepted by all UKRI, which will be anything under the banner of AHRC or ESRC, which are the two bodies that you're most likely to, with a history sort of focus in some way, be applying to. And like I said, there is a proportion that will be international students of every cohort. I don't know what the proportions are. They've just said a proportion. So they won't go above a certain proportion. I think I want to say it's about 40%, I think 30-40%, but I can't say if that's exactly it or not. I just know that that they have now moved everyone to international status that hasn't got home status, i.e. UK status. So yeah, so the short answer is yes, they are allowing international students. It was more just to clarify who now counts as an international student because, unfortunately, of Brexit.
We've got a question here. Does the PhD in UK based on calls? Oh, can you do a PhD in the UK based on, is that sort of remotely perhaps? If Yasaman would like to turn the camera on and unmute to clarify. I don't want to get your question wrong. But if so, then yes, you can do it.
Hello everybody, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you for your meeting. Actually, my question is about this. Is it something like, because now I'm in Italy, I'm studying in Italy, and here PhD is based on the open calls in around like March or April. There would be some open calls and students would be allowed to apply for that. Is it something like this in UK, or we are allowed to apply for, I don't know, for PhD and be in contact, be in touch with professors anytime we want?
I mean, I do know some about this, but I don't want to step in unless if somebody else knows.
I'm happy to speak a bit to this, just because my day job is working in a university department, so I'm in professional services in a university as well as being a PhD student. If you don't mind, Carrie. Rachel, sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
So generally speaking, I'd say that the funding cycles through the kind of DTPs they're running now, aren't they? Like, I think LAHP is open now, and that tends to be quite common. They do a kind of October to January cycle. Yep. And that kind of DTP thing is very much on you, right? So you're bringing the subject to that, and they're deciding to fund it. But there are other calls for funded research positions, research PhDs, tautology, which are usually when they are attached to a kind of externally funded research project led by a principal investigator or PI, and the project comes with, usually 1 to 3, sometimes a little bit more funded research positions, and then you're asked to do something quite specific. Like, I've seen one that I remember seeing when I was about to start my PhD, which I was never going to, apply for because it's not my area at all, was kind of masculinity in the British Navy in the 18th century. It's that kind of thing. You'll be asked to kind of bring you're then applying for a role effectively. It's more like a job call, and they tend to be more kind of throughout the year. I would suggest signing up to alerts on jobs.ac.uk if you really want to go for the open call thing. And then you just have to be lucky. It has to be something you're interested in that you can kind of justify applying to, and is entirely dependent on whether the principal investigator gets funding. So that's another route that you can get to a funded PhD.
Just to add something to that, there are also open calls that ask for certain demographics. So there are BAME studentships, and one was just released today in Hertfordshire. So I'll just drop it in the chat. But yeah, basically it's a funded PhD in English language and literature and film studies. And it's only eligible for BAME students to kind of offset the whiteness of academia.
Thank you for sharing that, Vincent. So I'm just going to kind of whiz through them a bit quicker. Claire asks, how do both PhD and funding applications weight various aspects of the application? So including undergrad, MA grades, feasibility of project, references, or is it not weighted and on a case-by-case basis? So does anyone have any?
So from what I heard for LAP of how they selected us is that basically they had about 5 or 6 professors from different kind of areas of history. They took all of our applications, about 80 of them, and then they kind of all ranked them from 1 to 80 and collated everything.
That's right.
Yeah, and so I think that's HRC like standard methodology, which means that you have to excite, because I had my supervisor was on it, which like also explains why I did get some funding. But also I had 5 other people or 6 other people that weren't in my field, which you also have to impress. And you also have, so I think it's almost all the research. I don't think grades really matter. I do think like everything like feasibility, but the thing is everyone will have good grades, everyone will have good references. It can only be a strike against you. It can't really be, it won't bring you to the next level. Yeah. And then you've heard the numbers, about 80 applicants who are all offer holders at King's or UCL or SOAS at the time. And I think 5 of us got it. And that's what's called a lottery. It's not so much a merit that me and Saffron were the best of the best and the top of the top, is that our projects happened to fit a gap at the time. They happened to work, and we got them. It's also, I think, Rachel, you kind of said, you know, this idea of like not taking lack of funding personally, and it is true, because it's only getting harder and harder. There's less and less money, more and more students, more and more universities are collated into partnerships, and I think that's also important to hear.
Yeah, it's so important. Absolutely. I think the other thing to say on this is that they put most weight on the research proposal. That is the most important thing for them. The other thing is, if we're going down a DTP route, is how you fit in with their body. So if you're fitting in with their idea of their ethos, you're specifically maybe needing to be based at that DTP and not another one. How you contribute to the research community you're about to join as well, because you'll be part, if you're in a DTP, you'll be part of a research community that has training, that has workshops, that runs their own research clusters and events and things, and they'll really want to know how you can contribute to that. I know that's not something that will necessarily decide the project. The research proposal is first and foremost the most important, but you can get rejected on that basis. So especially if there's small margins, which at this level there really can be, because everything is of such a good quality, that this can sometimes be the make or break. Is actually, if these two are brilliant, how do we decide against them? Well, one is a better fit with our DTP than the other, and that can simply be the difference. So I think that Vincent's 100% right. It's the proposal, but just bear in mind these other parts of the application aren't necessarily, they could reject you on that if your proposal is just as good as everybody else's. So they're more like deciding factors after the proposals.
Okay. So Pat asks, she knows that the PhD is a solitary experience. So what advice would you offer to help combat the feelings of isolation that I imagine most will feel at one time or another? Does anyone have any tip? Join History Lab is one of them, but it's something that we all sort of go through.
I could, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
My university and department is incredibly small, and there's not many of us, and nobody else that I study with studies anything remotely similar to my topic or period. But the one good thing about it is that kind of the pandemic kind of brought us all together, and we made this little group, and we have regular chats and like just like Zoom chats and things. So I'd say, and it has been literally like the only thing that honestly stopped me from quitting at times, to be honest. So I would say the most important thing is early on, be comfortable talking to people, because there's like, I'm sure everyone here will agree, it's really hard. Like it can be really hard at times, and you need to be able to admit and be like, I'm not having a good time, and just find some people that you can say that to openly, because the likelihood is that they might turn around and say to you, nor am I. So I think that probably, yeah, it is really lonely at times, and but kind of admitting it and just kind of working around it and noticing that in yourself when you're feeling a little bit kind of alone and you need to reach out to someone, and doing it ASAP and not kind of letting it fester, and then it can go away really quickly. And the other one for me is speaking to my supervisor. If I am kind of feeling a bit isolated or not too good about what I'm doing, I find that like checking in with them, even just like a few emails or something, rather than a full-on kind of meeting, is really, really helpful. And they can kind of like direct things your way, or just for a chat. I mean, at the end of the day, they are there to obviously advise you academically, but that's why I think it is incredibly important that you do have a really good working relationship with them, because then if you feel like that way and you are a little bit isolated, they should be someone that you feel really comfortable with reaching out to. So I don't know if anyone else kind of agrees, but I think that they're primarily the things that have helped me the most. And Twitter has been really, really great. I've met a lot of people on there that are in my subject and area, and we've shared articles, resources, had little chats and things. It is a little bit sad sometimes that it is all online. I'm not a big fan of online communication as a sole kind of way of life, but you know, it's the world we live in at the moment, and it can be really, really helpful, and a lot more helpful than you'd think. So don't be disheartened. It can be, but you'll be fine.
We all
Yeah,
get
it can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly. There's plenty of strategies and things, and ultimately everyone knows how isolating it can be. So it sounds quite odd, but like that in itself can like unify you all, and you do kind of build up a community really quickly, I'd say.
Okay, brilliant. Gary. So Wasim has two questions. One about teaching, so teaching undergraduates this year and next. And secondly, have many of you been working on articles alongside your PhD? So teaching, I know that Wasim's at Birmingham or wants to round the Midlands. The University of Birmingham, I don't think is offering teaching at the moment. Same with Leicester. It's sort of it's quite a common experience. But you can pick it up next year and hopefully, and you can get training as well to go along with it. And secondly, have you been working on articles? Yeah, you can definitely do articles alongside your PhD. I'm working on one at the moment. It's tough, but it's something to add to your publication CV. Does anyone else have a similar? Anyone else from the roundtable?
Yeah, I'm teaching.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had to like throw a fit, so King's College wouldn't put me in person. So I'd be laying my life on the line for History 101. So just know that also when you're teaching, you're bottom of the ladder. So in terms of workers' protections, you have none. Your right to strike is already kind of weird, especially if you're on a tier 4 visa, you could actually not be able to strike. And just know that like I'm going to keep it real. Like I respect the union, I respect UCU, I'm part of the union. If a problem disproportionately affects PhD students, they won't step in. They'll step in for pensions and for pays for professors. And when you look at the picket lines, it's all going to be graduate students. And right now, for example, the UKRI kind of knocked us over with extensions, thankfully not London, but other consortiums. And UCU is doing a strongly worded letter. But anyway, that's kind of but just to say that like, yes, you can teach. Just know you will get the like most basic classes. You'll get overloaded classes. Whatever basically the university kind of wants to dump, it'll do on you. But it is fun. I do like teaching. I am having a good time with my class. I've actually found that like Zoom class has been really nice because a lot of my students are international and could stay home and still kind of get a degree instead of being like in some dorm in London like by themselves. So I actually do really value this. I have students, for example, students are carers. I think it's great that we're developing kind of online options. And then the articles, you can, but you don't have to. Again, it's whether you want to get a job in academia or not. Articles have gone for a huge inflation, which is 10 years ago, you did your first article during your postdoc. Now it's a good idea to have 2 of them by the time you defend, when you look at what jobs demand and who gets the jobs. So it'll be, hi James. It'll be kind of something that will evolve as we go, as the academic job market goes.
Sorry, if I could just add to that, I completely agree with what Vincent's just said about teaching. Also, I do really like teaching, but I just wanted to add that if you're thinking about self-funding and teaching as like a source of income, it's really not reliable, because like pay schedules, how many hours you work versus how many hours you pay for, all of that is like not anything that you can know what to expect ahead of time, and therefore you can't budget or plan. So that might be something to bear in mind as well. Like teaching is really seen by the universities as like an add-on experience, and so it's not really like a financial stability.
I'd see it as a gift to you, that like you're supposed to be grateful to be paid. And again, like I think also it's important to be transparent about teaching. I'm paid $17.50 an hour, which I think is a line on UCL. That's actually a lot for GTA work, which is like most are paid less. King's History had a really active student movement, so we actually got paid a little bit more. It's actually maybe at 18 now, but you won't be paid a lot. There's going to be a lot of stuff you won't be paid for, as in preparation. You only get we're only paid 2 hours, I think, but like it'll take more. And yeah, as Saffron said, especially during COVID. So Ellen, you said that Birmingham and Leicester aren't offering teaching, which is in part because of COVID, I guess. And that's something, again, you can negotiate with the university and they'll just say no. And you won't have a fallback. So, be mindful of that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to teaching, it's a very delicate issue for a lot of people, particularly at the moment. I think there is a consensus that everyone who does teach, myself included, absolutely loves teaching. And I think that there's no problem with that. There's just a lot of politics goes on behind the scenes to do with PGR teaching experiences and GTA teaching, availability of teaching, pay of teaching, that if you are looking at teaching, you'll need to be mindful of, but we can't fully address here because of time restrictions. I think we've done well at sort of generally covering the basic things we need to watch out for. But if you are interested in teaching and want more information about the ins and outs of that, because it is quite a delicate and difficult topic at the moment, please just get in touch by email, and we can probably expand on it much more in that, rather than going into it right now, because we could be here unfortunately all night with the ins and outs of teaching.
Yeah, so there are a lot of questions. I guess we can provide email addresses or do something, but just to move on, so Amy Wilson asks, is it poor practice or inappropriate to cold call a few potential supervisors? She doesn't want to, shaking heads here, you don't want to offend anyone, but at the same time you want to maximize my chance to find the right person for me. Gary?
No, it's not inappropriate, but don't send a form like, here's my thing. I think it's good to be like, I saw you work on X. Yeah. You might be interested in Y being your project, but I don't think you need to go more than that.
Great.
She also asks, sorry, just further down, just while we're on Amy's,
yeah.
She also asks how long the research proposals were.
I mean, the place you're applying to will have guidance. Mine was 3,000 words and the guidance was 1,500 words, but I couldn't cut it down any further. And I just submitted as was, but the original institution I was applying to said that it was meant to be around 3,000 words. So it's very variable, and you'll just have to look at it on that one. But sort of, in the first instance, I say aim for 1,500 words for your summary.
Yeah, funding tends to be between 1,000 and 1,500, and the institution tends to be between 2,000 and 3,000. So actually, that's really great advice, because you can make things longer later on if you need to. But if you are applying for funding, get the concise version, and then when you've got the PhD application, expand on it later.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay, Jessica Bollinger wants to ask some questions. If you'd like to unmute and put your video on, that'd be great, or just unmute. Go for it.
I think she asked them underneath.
Oh,
I would be an international student. Can international students receive HRC funding?
Brilliant, thanks.
Oh, right, so we've covered that one, so that's fine. We've got one from Robert, which I've missed out in the line, who says, does PhD students teach undergrad classes, and is this dependent on the institution? I think we've probably covered that one already. Robert, if you want any more information, like I said, use the email and we can expand on that at a later time.
We've got one from Katie about part-time PhDing. So does she need to state that in her application, and also she just like advice for part-time PhDing?
I'm happy to speak to this a bit. I think there were a couple of questions about doing a part-time PhD, and if I can see the others, I'll try and cover that as well. But I mentioned that I was working only in the personal statement, not in the kind of research proposal, and I did that to kind of provide evidence as to what why I would be able to do the PhD. It's kind of like I know how to manage my time because I already have a full-time job, and I will be able to manage my PhD like a full-time job. I mean, your supervisor will be aware of it. If you're self-funded, it's pretty much going to be seen as inevitable. I would address it in the personal statement, and just address like one of the huge problems for self-funded PhD students who are working. And this is especially pertinent if you're going to work full-time, and people do, they work full-time and they do a part-time PhD, is how you're going to manage your time. For me, it wasn't such a problem because I switched to part-time working when I started my PhD, so it was kind of already inbuilt. But it's a huge, I mean, for me in my kind of day job, if someone applies to our institution and says, I will fund this by working full-time and doing the PhD part-time, that's a huge, I don't want to say red flag at all. It's not a red flag in the sense that we think it's a bad thing, but it's something we want to talk to the student and to be aware that they know the burden of the workload that they'll be taking on, especially if you have a job that is a career, you know, and not, which I mean, is a job that you take home in your head, which my job very much is. I think about it when I finished. You know, I get up in the middle of the night and I do my emails because it's that kind of job. So if you are going to do that, you know, make sure that you've spoken to your supervisor and that you're addressing some of the concerns which might come up immediately, but you don't have to do it, you know, at length, just a couple of lines. I've been a project manager for X number of years. I know how to work to deadlines, and this will benefit me when doing the PhD. It's fine.
Great, thanks, Chloe. So we've got a really good question about being in the process of building up a proposal with a supervisor. What's that experience like, and what do they expect from me, and what might I expect from them? They're also confused about anticipating a timeline for the project, especially as it's a practice-based project. So does anyone want to speak about the supervisor relationship, supervisor etiquette and all that kind of thing?
I don't mind. My supervisor was my undergraduate supervisor, so we had a really good relationship anyway. And even after I left my undergrad, I went to do an MA elsewhere. We still kept in contact, and he kind of like kept up with what I was doing. So it was very informal, and he even kind of helped me apply for funded bits here, there, and everywhere. And it was kind of like a very helpful situation. So I suppose it's probably not generic, but at the same time, I would say that just regular contact. I think, I don't know what everyone else believes, but just letting them know what's going on. And like what was said earlier about being mindful of the fact that they are fitting this in around like probably increasingly busy schedules and things like that. And just kind of politeness and a courtesy, but also be upfront. Like if things are going to take longer than they are, or you're waiting for things, or you're not sure, or you've got a question, just ask them, because at the end of the day, if they're helping you kind of develop the proposal, then they want you to study, they want to help you, and they want to work with you probably. So just be upfront and honest, and just be as open with them as possible, because it could potentially kind of set the foundation for that kind of relationship moving forwards.
Yeah, I guess also this cuts with a later question by Philip Banks about getting an indication of what people are like or whatever. There is luck involved. You know, I did practically didn't do any of my schooling in England. I went to a French school, and when I was applying for PhD in England, I was living in America. I was living in Portland. So there wasn't even a way, and like, you know, this is before coronavirus, so everybody was just like online. What's that? Especially people that like in their 40s, like no way to convince them that you should do like a Skype. So it is a coin flip. And also, even if you ask people what might work for one person may not for the other, your PhD supervisor may change over 4 years. They may have a kid, for example, like their availability like nosedives, like that can happen very easily. I think for me, what did make me think more about my supervisor at King's is that she sent me a really detailed email back, whereas most PhD supervisors I talked to were just kind of like, yeah, that's fine, like sounds good, like, you know, let me know for funding or whatever. She had actually, and she'd found me a second and a third supervisor, weirdly. So I think that you do have these small indications, but Philip was kind of asking, you know, like you are going for a staff page and putting in years of work. Yes, more or less everybody is, especially if you're foreign, and you just kind of hope that it will work out. And sometimes it doesn't, unfortunately. There are issues with supervisors. And again, real big honesty time, there are no grievance processes. If you're abandoned by your supervisor, you're fucked. There are some that are technically inbuilt in universities, but let's not kid ourselves. But these are super minor cases. Most of the time, it either goes well or it's a good working relationship. It's rare when it really goes. I don't know about you guys, but like I haven't heard too much.
I'd like to kind of add in on that, which is what Vincent said is is really important about it kind of being difficult to assess. But one thing you can do is just ask your supervisor a difficult question, your prospective supervisor, a difficult question if you have one. So when I was applying for the PhD, I think I was 30 when I started applying. I was at the time in quite a long-term relationship, and I asked my prospective supervisor, what are we going to do if I'm doing this PhD and I want to have a baby? And to me, I was kind of like, am I actually going to ask this question? I was kind of embarrassed. I found it very personal. But her response to that was so reassuring that I really felt like, yes, I will be supported if things go on in my life. And I really felt that it was appreciated that the PhD was a part of my life, but wasn't my life. And that was the kind of thing that I wanted, a very professional relationship, but one in which there was empathy with the fact that I was going to be doing other things, sometimes potentially quite big things, and obviously it's not like applicable to everyone. Not everyone's at that stage in their life. Not everyone wants to have a kid, but you might have something on your mind, quite significant like that, and a question that might be quite hard to ask. I did find it really, really embarrassing to ask that, because it was kind of like intervening on this quasi-professional relationship. But the response was really reassuring and helped me know that I was making the right choice in choosing my supervisor. So I would say, if anything's preying on your mind, ask it now. And if they go, oh, a baby, what's that? Then you kind of know, well, maybe this relationship isn't gonna work out.
Yeah, that's why I was saying in the presentation, if you have the opportunity to try and actually meet your supervisor on a casual basis, and by that I mean not just talk about the project, but talk about, just get to know them as a person. The other way to do that this is the route that I took, is that on their staff profile pages, they often put on their candidates that they have recently or are currently supervising, and you can try and get in touch with them to find out what they're like as a supervisor. They will have first-hand experience of all different stages, and they would be really great people to ask what it's like to work with that person, because they're already doing it. So I did that, and I found that really, really helpful, especially if sometimes people can talk in a way that they're quite straightforward and blunt about things, but they don't necessarily mean it in a bad way. And if you're prepared for things like that, it might not be a bad thing, but it might be if it comes on you unawares and things like that. So it just prepares you for that person's way of working.
Okay, we're approaching 7, but we know there is the time for socializing, so we can have a few more questions if the roundtable are willing. If not, please drop
just Ellen can then just muddle through to finish if needed.
Yeah. So timeline, I think there are templates to cover, but be mindful of your own archival work. State where you're going to research, state any trips. So my funding institution certainly likes you to be adventurous, so ask your supervisor about that. Amy Wilson asks about references. So she's been working for the past 15 years plus. Should her boss be a referee? She knows the current work best. We've covered references a little bit, but isn't from the academic world. Any thoughts? Quickly?
If someone's been out of academia for 10 years, if there's a longish gap, it's pretty standard for at least one reference to be a professional one. But it's usually ideal if you have one reference, if you can, from your undergraduate or postgraduate degrees. But it's fairly standard for, and 15 years, people would understand that your academic references might have kind of, moved on, retired, whatever.
Thanks, Chloe. Yeah. Julia asks if anyone has any information on finding institutions and supervisors. So Rachel did recommend databases of the DTPs. They sometimes provide a place where you can search for supervisors according to themes and topics. Where did everyone else search for their? My supervisor was my undergraduate supervisor, and she recommended someone who I went with. Kerry, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm the same. My undergrad supervisor is my current one, but I was just gonna say, you know who kind of like the big names are in your field and what you're studying. So, you know, like the big key texts or whatever, maybe start there, and then just if you're reading around things to write your proposal, then just maybe start with the people that you're reading. Because and then follow, like everyone said, go onto their institutional pages, look if they're accepting PhD students, and like if they've accepted ones that are similar to your kind of topics before. But ultimately, like you're the only person probably who's going to know who might be suitable for your topic, I guess. But if you are studying at the minute, kind of speak to MA supervisors and they might be able to recommend people.
I mean, I literally just Googled my research area for mine and then saw who came up and then like checked if they were looking for PhD students. So I think that's also fine. And probably if you've been out of academia for a bit longer, that might be an easier starting point. And then you can like delve into whether or not they'd be accepting you or if their research is actually relevant, etc.
Yeah, I went by school and kind of like looked through the faculty list. It's also kind of the advantage as well, which I did like with my supervisor kind of outside of my topic, because then I can be really brash and kind of trash people in my topic area and not offend my supervisors, which is kind of nice. Like I know there are a lot of books that I started by liking and now I disagree with. So I'm happy they're not supervising me. So also be mindful of that when you're looking for supervisors. You don't need somebody who's like the expert in your topic. It can be really helpful, but it can be like, you know, there can be some allowances in terms of how aligned they are.
Definitely. Thanks, Vincent. So Charles asks, if you are self-funded, is there a real difference between full-time and part-time as far as the institution is concerned? No? No.
I'll just go first, Chloe. I don't think so, no. I work alongside some people who are self-funded part-time. I have my supervisions once a month. They have them once every 6 weeks. That is literally it. Yeah.
Great. Chloe, did you have
just in terms of the milestones, really? You know, I'm upgrading. I'm going into my 3rd year and I'm upgrading this December. So it's just a difference of like the milestones you will have to reach. But yeah.
Great. So Elliot asks, do you think it's harder to apply once you've been once you've been out of university for a while? Go ahead.
Not at 4 years, I would say. Like, yes, a big gap, but I did my MA 2012 to 2014 and I started my PhD in 2018. So I'd say 4 years isn't actually that long. You know, and your especially now, your institution will have all their records electronically and so on, and they'll just go back and have a look. So you know, I don't think a short period like 4 years is much to worry about, and I don't think a longer period is really much to worry about. It just has a few more kind of logistical challenges.
I also think people think that everybody does the straight like undergrad, master's, PhD. It's very rare. I think I did that, but I think I'm the only one in my cohort almost. Most people took some time. Saffron, you worked in museums for a year.
I'm out in between both between BA, MA and well, actually I say that I still worked through the MA, but I took a year out in between both between BA and MA, and then MA and PhD to do.
Yeah, it's atypical to not have a gap.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Brilliant. So next, Jill asks, have there been any moments when anyone has regretted self-funding because it's such a big step to take? So I guess just advice around the self-funded route.
You want to go first, Kerry?
Yeah, sure. So my decision to self-fund come out of my specific personal circumstances at the time. Without giving you my life story, I applied for some kind of very specific funded projects that were in my period, but not kind of interest. And to be honest with you, I didn't really try as hard as I should applying for them. I didn't get them. Probably a good thing. And then I hated my job at the time, and I just thought, do you know what, sod it, I'm going to do it anyway. And my supervisor was really great. He was like, yeah, you know, we'll have you here. He helped me apply for the other places, but I was like, yeah, that's not a problem. And then I just went for it, and I thought, I want to do it now, so I will. It seems quite flippant, and it's obviously not the poster path to take. And but I do kind of want to advocate for it as a potential route for people, because I started with a proposal that was very different to kind of what I'm working on at the moment. And through the self-funding, I think I've had so much more freedom than a lot of friends I know have had, and kind of like being given a lot of different opportunities that I can just kind of like take it however I wish, because it is ultimately very much my project. And there are some things to consider, like my institution gives me some expenses that I can claim back. So I can claim back, it's £500 this year, but like research expenses and things. So you're not ultimately left on your own, but you do have to consider your personal circumstances, full-time or part-time. I might end up switching part-time, but we don't know. And I think you have to, if you're going to do it, the one thing I would say is you have to be open to being flexible and open with the potential supervisors, because we had a discussion about how much work I could like feasibly get away with in terms of a job and that kind of thing. And just be really open with them and honest about it. And if they are really, really supportive, which you do need, then if you want to do it, go for it, because it does give you a lot of freedom. But I would be lying to you if there weren't some nights where I sat there and thought, why did I do this? But I do think that it also comes from a lack of knowledge. I went to do my undergrad at a very small institution. It really wasn't common to even plan to do an MA, never mind a PhD. No clue of anything about academia in any sense of the word. The specific funded projects were the only ones that I knew about. I didn't know anything about funding partnerships, open things, anything like that. I didn't know that I could write a proposal on what I wanted to do and then just submit that. I thought it had to be a very specific topic. So I think that kind of like your background can play a really, really important factor in self-funding. But and it is important to note that that is why a lot of people do self-fund, and ultimately it can make it a lot harder. But if you want to do it, I think you just have to be assured of your passion for it and not let anyone put you off, because there will be people who look down on you and say, bad idea, why are you doing that? You're wasting your life, you're wasting your money. But, you know, it's your life, why shouldn't you? And like how was kind of reiterated earlier, it's just what someone thought was fun at the time. And like now, as I've been going into it, people have been kind of moving towards like things that are similar to what I'm trying to do, and it's encouraging. So I would say, yeah, it's really hard. There are times when I have regretted it, but they are outbalanced by the freedom and kind of the mode of study that I have been given, and kind of like the independence as well. So sorry, that was a really long rant that nobody really needed, but yeah.
Oh, I think it was really relevant. I think you spoke to a lot of things that self-funded, the benefits as well, because I think a lot of people forget there are benefits to doing things self-funded, particularly that freedom of the time restraint, if nothing else, and there's much more freedom than the sort of strict sort of rules that you have when you're funded. So I think you spoke beautifully.
I do just want to say, sorry, you do have to follow the same guidelines in terms of submission. It's absolutely no different to, you know, it's not like, there is a kind of tendency for people to see it as a hobby, that because no one's funded it, you're just doing it for fun. And it's like, no, I do still have a deadline, and this is still kind of like a formal course that I am registered on. So I think that is really important to know. But yeah, if you want to do it, you'll be fine. But I think the kind of the things that are caught up in it, and like the issues to do with backgrounds and how people apply for PhDs, I think it is kind of like one of the last hurdles that's not really openly discussed. But yeah, I'm sorry, I've lost where I'm going now. But no one's kind of prejudged me at my institution. They've all been great. And I think that smaller institutions are probably, I don't know, Chloe's probably going to counter this, but might be better. I did it as well because I wanted to study at my university. They wouldn't fund me in any way. They don't have the funding. They're a really small place. But I wanted to study there. It was where I felt most comfortable and where I felt that I would kind of succeed. So I think it is an incredibly personal thing. But and yes, there are regrets. But I'm sure that everyone else has regrets in kind of their path. So don't let anyone discourage you, and kind of like keep pushing forwards, because it is a very valid route. Sorry, I'll stop now.
I'm just going to weigh in quickly and say I do have a slightly different, I guess, perspective or opinion on this. And one is that, you know, and this is not just about self-funding or part-time, but I think when you're thinking about doing a PhD, and this in any subject really, you have to think seriously about what you're going to give up, because you are going to give something up. You know, you will be giving up a lot of your personal life. You will be giving up lots of things. And if you are, especially as I did, I went from full-time to part-time, I sometimes think I gave up my career trajectory. I really did. You know, in a job I'm very serious about. And that, you know, despite all the stupidities around loving your work, I love my work. You know, I take it really seriously. I don't work part-time. I'm contracted to work 17.5 hours. I definitely work over that pretty much every week. I don't have a work-life balance. I don't have a work PhD balance. I think about the PhD on days I'm working, and I think about my work on days I'm doing, you know, PhD. I used to be sitting in the British Library, and I would take a break, and my break would be emailing, you know, for work. And it's you have to think seriously about what you're giving up in terms of your career trajectory if you are, as I was, you know, on a career pathway. And I was actually, I'm conscious this is being recorded and it's in front of a lot of strangers, and I've already said that I told my supervisor I wanted to have a baby, so I'm obviously, my boundaries are quite low, but I'm not sure if I should put this figure on it, but I did do some calculations the other day on how much the PhD had cost me in terms of lost earnings, the fees, the cost of actually going and doing research, because I go to Belgium and do research in ordinary years, and it was a lot of money, a lot of money. It was over 20,000, you know. And I was just like, wow, that is a lot of money. And if I'd actually sat down and done that calculation, it would have really shocked me. And you need to think seriously about what that will mean for you. You know, what it means in terms of your pathway, because I wanted to do this because I wanted to change careers, and I see this as a kind of investment into changing to a career as an academic, but you know, you really need to think seriously about all the things you're giving up, about the work that you might really enjoy, about your ability to be promoted, about your ability to have any kind of headspace. I probably would choose it again if I'd known how stressed and anxious I would be a lot of the time, but at the same time, the stress and anxiety is really real, you know. And the kind of the money issues are really real. Like, you know, I gave up 50% of my income. That's a lot of income to give up. And you do get used to living on a certain income. And I live in London, so, you know, it's very expensive. And giving up 50% of my income meant giving up a lot of like things I'd become quite used to having and doing. And which is, again, it's not to put you off, but it's to think seriously about it. And if you think seriously about it and you still come out the other end and you think, yeah, this is what I want, then that's good. You know, I did know that this would be a sacrifice for my career. It's a huge sacrifice for your personal life as well, or it can be. You know, your relationships, your friendships, your you know, there's so much that you are potentially giving up, and your career could be kind of one of the things that you are really setting aside. And if, I mean, as I said, I started my PhD when I was 31. My friends are getting married, they're buying houses. You know, if you're doing the PhD at like 23, your friends are slightly less likely to be on that trajectory. But there are moments where it's like, they're married, they have a house, they have a dog, they're having a baby, and I'm still a student, and that can be, sometimes you can go, wow, that's intense, especially when you're doing it part-time, and I'm going to finish in 2025. So, you know, think seriously about what that will mean for you, because this is not just something you're doing for a year. This is something you're potentially doing for 6-7 years, and you've got to be in it for the long haul, and you've got to be aware of how difficult this might be, you know. But you can still do it, it's fine, but just be aware.
Just really quickly on the end of that, I was just going to say that that's really interesting that Chloe would say that, because for me, my decision making to do it and to self-fund it specifically now, well, a year ago, I'm going into my second year, was that I didn't have, well, again, oversharing, but my personal life was pretty blank, and I didn't have a career. I was in a job that I was not remotely interested in pursuing. So losing that as such and like going back to kind of like the bare slate of studying was okay for me. And I didn't feel like I was giving a lot up. And a lot of the thinking was, if I do it now, then I won't have to give potentially things up in the future. Whereas if I kind of get into a career and then I still have it niggling in the back of my head that I might want to do it one day, then I am going to be kind of in a position where I am making those sacrifices that I won't have to make now, which is why I decided to do it now. So I just thought that was really interesting that you should say that and share that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks guys. I think that will be really helpful for people, just an honest space, just say these things. Okay, so there has been a question about, is it still okay if I reached out to supervisors to guide me further on reading and sources? Absolutely. In my experiences, I got most of my research proposal sources from them, so definitely they will entertain that for sure. And then just on the back of that, there was a question about how many funding applications you did. Saffron, did you want to come in? I know that I haven't given you much space to speak, so how many did you apply?
Oh yeah, sure. I did 4 in total, 4 institutions and funding bodies, but I applied 5 times because the first year I applied in one place and I didn't get the funding. So then the next year I reapplied there and applied to 3 other places. And just to say also, I heard before I was applying that I think the average for AHRC is like 5 applications or something. So I guess the lesson is expect to be rejected from a lot of them.
Brilliant. Yeah. And then there was a question from Robert. Rachel, I think you were going to chime in there. If not, we can.
Oh, I've already dealt with it.
Brilliant.
Sorry, just in terms of questions,
Yeah.
I just flag, we have some questions from disability and caring, which I think we need to talk about before we leave.
Yeah.
People are asking if it's hard. It's hard. The PhD structure does not account for you not being able-bodied, not having a family, not having a life. You're supposed to be a machine. You're supposed to be able to have free 4 years without major issues in your life, and a child will count as an issue, as Chloe kind of mentioned. Parents get really isolated. There's very little provisions for childcare. Conferences, for example, won't really provide it. It's still not very standard practice. It's not discussed either. So it's not like it's something that's ever at the forefront. I became PGR rep at history at King's, and yeah, they had parents I asked people what they thought, and a lot of parents were saying, it's really isolating. It's just all the events are during weekdays. I have nobody to babysit my kid. My partner's at work. So stuff like that. And then it's kind of the same thing on disability. Conferences are still not particularly accessible. Even, for example, you'll find very few conferences that are online that will even do closed captioning now for people that may need that. Accessibility on wheelchair and stuff is still not good. So yeah, I don't want to be like bleak or anything. And I know that there are like active movements fighting for that, especially in PGR circles. But even, for example, UKRI extensions, there were letters from disabled students saying like, we need a blanket extension. We can't always have to bargain for continued existence in academia. And basically the UKRI was like, yeah, that's nice. Okay, moving on.
I would say that we are actually, funnily enough, that is the next question that we had. And the question was actually whether they should mention their disability in the application process. So I just thought it would be useful to address that the next question.
Does anybody, I'd say.
I'm not sure, in all honesty. I think it would depend on the application. I mean, I don't remember there being a specific bit to mention anything like that. I mean, I suppose it might be up to your own discretion. If, for example, if you think that you're doing a project on disability, that would actually be really important that you have that, then I would. Otherwise, I would only mention it if you feel like it's relevant. I don't know what anybody else thinks.
No, that's a good point, Rachel. Yeah. If not, we can move on, and perhaps we can have a personal conversation later if that would help. So Tony asks, how is the experience of giving talks? So there's loads of questions. I don't think we're going to get through them, but maybe we can revert to Twitter or something like that. How is the experience of giving talks, peer review papers experience weighed towards the PhD application? So should you come with a certain amount of experience with these public outcomes? I certainly didn't have peer review papers, or I don't think I gave any talks, and I didn't put that on my application.
Bear in mind that the like platonic ideal of the PhD applicant is someone who's gone straight from their undergrad to their MA to their PhD with no breaks in between. So no, you know, yes, by the time you leave the PhD, there are these expectations, but no one's really going to expect it of you.
No. And again, it's all about the research proposal.
Yeah.
No talk on earth can put you over the edge for that.
Yeah, and also you have everyone who, no matter who you are, will have a range of experiences, be they work, academic, whatever, and you can easily put work experiences in as transferable skills in some way that will help you to be ready for the PhD. So any experience in those kind of question boxes would be fine. It doesn't have to be talks, peer review papers and things like that.
Great, thanks guys. Next is Joe asking, I would be working full-time, hoping to utilise remote learning as much as possible. What is the balance like on a part-time basis? And they would be self-funded. Chloe, did you want to say?
I mean, honestly, tough. It's like working full-time and doing a PhD part-time, it's really, really tough. It's not that it's not possible, but again, it's like that question of what are you going to give up if you're already, if you're working full-time, you're not giving up your job. How much of your personal life can really stretch to incorporating doing the PhD? And also, just on a practical note, if you're working 5 days a week, how are you going to go kite and things like that? Are you going to use your annual leave for it? There are lots of kind of practical questions to ask yourself, because I think it will be really tough, not impossible, but really, really, you have to be so organized, and you have to really know what you're doing, when you're doing, where you're going. I mean, I would suggest designing your project to make use of digitized sources as much as possible. So if you have a project in mind and you can use newspaper archives, they tend to be digitized, and that's really useful. I use a lot of digital archives. In fact, I have 64 tabs open of the Daily Mail between 1914 and 1918 right now. It's riveting. But think seriously about how you're going to access your resources if you have basically only weekends, and seriously think about that. It's not that I want to put anyone off if that's the only way in which you can get the PhD you want to do, because I think that's it's not good, but it is a serious question. Like, how can your personal relationships bear the strain? Can you bear the strain of all that time and all that mental space being taken up? And I want to just emphasize that asking yourself these questions and then saying, actually, I don't want to do the PhD that much, or I don't think I can do it, doesn't make you a bad person, and it doesn't make you intellectually weak, and it doesn't mean that you're worse than your aunt's cousin's friend who knew someone who did it. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means like that you have assessed your priorities, and you have found that doing the PhD is not as important as other things in your life, which could be your career, your family, your mental health, and it's a question we all have to ask ourselves anyway. But if you are thinking of continuing working full time, I think it's even more pertinent to ask yourself those questions.
Yeah, I think on that topic, and I think this may have to be our ending note, but the PhD isn't a referendum on your intelligence. It's not a referendum on your potential to contribute to human knowledge. The PhD is super rigid. The factors that go into getting it are rigid. The factors that go into succeeding it are rigid. And you might be, for whatever reason, outside of that box. And that doesn't mean much. I know it's easy to say when we're kind of on the other side and you're trying to get one and like all of that. But also there are people that drop out because the PhD just doesn't work. Like this idea of like, you need these chapters, they need to be structured in this way and whatever, just doesn't work for them. And again, that's not a referendum on anything. And it's, again, if you get into a PhD project and you quit, I think that that's sometimes the biggest act of courage. You see people that like trudge through it and they go into mental health crisis, their life unravels, and some people just up and leave. And I think it's important as you apply to remember it's a lottery. There's luck involved, there's privilege involved. There's national circumstances involved, geopolitical movements like Brexit are involved that you can't control. And whether you do the PhD or not, whether you succeed in the PhD or not, what does matter, I know it's corny, I know it's cheesy, but it does matter that you're happy. And if the PhD is going to make you unhappy to the point that some people report when they're holding in tears every day or whatever, there's just no point. It is a blessing in disguise to not be in, especially because the objective of a PhD, what a PhD will achieve in your life is so fraught. Good academic jobs don't really exist anymore. The difference or earnings that your PhD will get you compared to a master's is not that much, actually, compared to the amount of time you put in. So it's really about whether you enjoy the PhD on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis, if you feel like you're doing what you're supposed to do. But again, it's such a small way to measure how people contribute, and you could exist in so many other ways.
Yeah, I think I said in the talk that actually the PhD in some ways is more about persevering with it and getting through it than actually testing your knowledge. And sometimes the better thing to do is actually to leave it aside and actually focus on. And I think Chloe was saying about what is the priorities here. I mean, I think I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know they did a survey of, I think it was 6,000 something or other PhD students, and 99% of them had said that they were seriously thought about quitting at one point or another. It's a very common feeling. It is an up and down process, and I don't think that we should shy away from that. And it is a massive test, and of course all of these other factors can just make it more difficult. So it's not you, it's the process. And I think that you need to be mindful of that when entering the process, is that it is a brutal process for everybody, and you should never feel like you failed if you actually have to leave it, because sometimes actually it's stronger to do that than to persevere through.
And it's the PhD that failed you.
Yes,
if you have to leave. That's, I mean, because
it's the process.
When you look at how also why people leave, it's rarely like, I'm overwhelmed by the reading, it's really stuff like that. It's exterior circumstances. It's the fact that the stipends are really low and puts you in economic stress if you're lucky enough to have one. It's the fact that some departments do have a hostile working culture. It's the fact that like also academics are so overworked that what used to be, I think, better pastoral care has really taken a hit in the last 20 years. And again, that's outside of your control. And it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. So I'll probably end it there just to say thank you. But I am mindful that there are lots of questions still that we haven't covered. But Rachel, what do you want to do? Maybe provide email addresses or?
I mean, I'm happy to stay on for 5 more minutes just till the past. I think what I will probably do though is actually write in the chat directly to you a sort of answer to your question if you're still around, just to make sure that you've got an answer to work with, rather than just ask the panel, because as you can see, depending on the topic, we could end up talking about some things for some time, because there is a lot to talk about on this subject. So maybe just for time, it might be that me and Ellen might just give you an answer. And if we think there needs to be more expert advice, for example, that other panel members may ask, what we'll do is we'll make sure that they get that question and you'll get an answer sent to you at some point.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And just to say thank you so much to our amazing panelists. I don't think there's ever been such a great panel. Also, really great. And I think we'll end it there. The next paper is next week. Any MAs or anyone can attend. You have to be a PhD student to be a member of History Lab, but you're more than welcome to attend. And yeah, we'll and we'll stay on, but if anyone wants to drop out now, that's absolutely fine. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ellen and Rachel, for organizing this.
Thanks, Vincent.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Saffron.
I think everyone's
slowly moving. I'll start answering some of the questions in case anybody's still around.
Yeah.
I actually don't know if there's that many left. I think a lot of the messages.
2 or 3, which is why I just said we might as well just try and reply quickly on here. So hopefully get that through.
Just got a message about applying for different pools of me, but I answered privately.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
I think Elliot had one on MRes.
Yes, Elliot's the only one that I think that I've missed out, because I think we've all replied to a couple of the bottom ones, which is what I was doing while that was going on too.
I think he's
got them. I don't know about MRes. Does anybody know, just before everyone leaves?
What's the question?
Lost it now. Do funding options change when applying as a Res M or MRes student for a PhD when the timescale for the PhD is dropped to 2 years as a result of the transfer for Res M? I don't know the answer to that.
I think when a funder has provision for allowing someone to effectively start receive funding in year, over the course of the PhD, it's adjusted pro rata. So if your timescale has dropped for any reason, whether it's because you already have started the PhD or you have a pre-award that counts towards it, you would just get the funding for 2 years if you got the funding, and that's if your funder has provision for you to start receiving funding. So LAHP, which is it does have provision for you to do start receiving funding once you're already underway, but it's like, I think you have to have not upgraded or still have 50% of your PhD to go, something like that. So that's
50% or under you can apply, which is most first year students, really, because of the way the cycle works. So if that works in the same way, then I would say it's probably, as long as you've still got 50% of a typical 3-year fund to go, which that would cover. That's only a year, isn't it, an MRes?
Yeah.
There's, I think, for ninth inning question from Stephen. I think it should relevant to Chloe and I about some of you at UCL. I have a supervisor at UCL, which is also why I'm going to apply there. Has it been a good institution? How is life in London? Define good institution.
Yeah, I'm just moving my thing so I can plug in.
Stephen, do you want to turn your mic on to ask what you're actually, what you'd be focused on?
Yeah.
If that's available to you.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was just because I wanted to possibly study in London, and sort of I heard 1 or 2 of you mention about cost of London, and UCL was one of the ones I was going to apply to. And I know everyone obviously does different courses and so forth, but I'm just wondering how's life, because obviously PhD is expensive anyway, and it's very draining and time consuming. I just wondered if you found that UCL is an institution you recommend for PhD students, and whether any challenges like working, particularly in London, because I want to study there. I'm willing to go to other places if it is too expensive, if it is too kind of taxing to be down there and so forth. Has that made any sense, or have I just kind of babbled the question?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Vincent, you might be able to speak to this better, because I already live in London, like London's my home kind of thing. So the cost of living in London is I don't want to say irrelevant, but I already live here. So I didn't factor that into my decision to kind of to go to UCL. In fact, for me, it made sense because I was already working in London to go to a London-based institution, and I went for my supervisor anyway. I don't know. I mean, I like being at UCL. I really like my cohort a lot, but then your cohort is very dependent on your cohort. So it's like everything I like very much about UCL is my cohort is really driven by having a very tight-knit cohort and an amazingly energetic student representative, particularly. I mean, I do like the infrastructure, but I mean, I don't know if this is like just me being a bit disengaged or is kind of a dirty secret, but I think if you have the supervisor you want and you have access to a library, it doesn't really matter. I mean, being in London is good if you have to use a lot of London-based archives, because then you don't need to travel down, right? But I mean, does it really make a difference? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not involved in like university social life outside of my PhD cohort. I'm not involved in, you know, athletics. I'm not involved in society stuff, and that's just because of like my circumstances of being part-time and also being like someone who's lived here so long. I have my own kind of community and stuff like that. So for me, it doesn't really make a difference. I do like being at UCL. I really like my supervisor and I like all of the activities and things like that. But yeah, I would say it's not that important. But
well, London, for example, for me, it was important just because like in terms of American history, other places of the UK can have like nothing in the library. Whereas British Library does have a lot. Also, flights from London to LA, my research is in LA, so like are really cheap, bizarrely. So that's like a big concern for me. But then I think also being in London, what's kind of cool is that you have the IHR and you have the seminars that are there. And when it was in person, it was very unequal because most history lab, I convened seminars 2 years ago. And yeah, most of our applicants would be in London or around London or have the possibility of coming to London. Same thing with the academics. And that did make a difference because you are at the epicenter of UK culture. And a very last thing is there's such a thing called the Golden Triangle, which is Cambridge, Oxford, London, and 41% of the UKRI's money goes there. So there's more money to go around in terms of funding and stuff like that. And so that might be a concern.
Okay. So yeah, I would definitely say based on that, my experience is definitely colored by the fact that I'm self-funded, that I already live here, that I work part-time, and I don't spend much time at my actual institution. You know, in normal times, I would spend all my time at the British Library. And it obviously is pertinent. So, I mean, do think a bit about, like, if you weren't in London, what resources would you need to be traveling down to London to go? And if it's a lot, it just might make more sense for you to pitch up in London rather than spending half your life and income traveling.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thank you for that. Actually, something you said, Vincent, where you said you do a lot of traveling to America for yours. I'm actually focusing on American history too, so that's something. So it sounds like you've answered a couple of questions you didn't mean to there.
Yeah. Are you looking at UCL Institute of the Americas?
Well, I'm still kind of in the early stages of figuring out, but I saw UCL was on there, and I thought, you know, obviously for some of the reasons that you mentioned about being near things, access to resources and so forth. It wasn't like a deal breaker or anything like that, but some of the reasons you mentioned that makes it more compelling to be in London, obviously, if American-based stuff.
Yeah, and Institute of the Americas is like really, really good to work at. It's a really close, tight-knit little institute that works really, really well. The head is awesome, and because I'm at King's mostly, but I have a supervisor there, and King's department's huge. We have 80 PhD students, 80 to 90. So it's massive. Yeah. It's very anonymous. Whereas UCL Institute of Americas is quite small. So you have that sense of cohorts. They don't have at King's.
Oh, cool. Vincent, would it be okay if maybe at some point in the future I could send you an email?
Yeah,
if you do American history,
yeah.
it's in London, it's ideal to be able to have someone like you.
I'll drop my address in the chat right now.
Great. Thank you so much for doing that.
No problem.
That's what we love to see.
Yeah, got it. Great. Thanks, Vincent.
No problem.
All right. I'm going to head off now. See you all. Yeah, good luck. Anyone still here who's thinking of applying?
Yeah.
Yes. Good luck, everybody. And, you know, thanks for coming. And thanks, Ellen and Rachel. It was great.
It was really good.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
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 Thank you so much to everyone who's still here. And thank you very much for attending this evening. We hope you got a lot out of it. I know we did. So thank you again.